Okay, so the Senate just did something absolutely unprecedented, and the White House is in total meltdown mode right now. We're talking about a historic constitutional moment that hasn't happened in over 200 years of American democracy. Late tonight, leaked reports from multiple Senate sources confirm that they have reached the magic number, the threshold that everyone thought was completely impossible just 72 hours ago. 67 senators, a full two-thirds supermajority, are now prepared to vote for conviction in the impeachment trial. This isn't speculation anymore. This isn't political theater. This is real. This is happening in real time, and the implications are absolutely massive. We're looking at the potential removal of a sitting president from office, something that has never successfully happened in the entire history of the United States. The ramifications go far beyond just one person or one administration. We're talking about a fundamental redefinition of executive power, a reshaping of the balance between the branches of government, and a political earthquake that will echo through American politics for decades to come. This changes everything: the 2026 midterms, the future of the Republican Party, America's standing with allies and adversaries around the world, and the very precedent of what accountability looks like at the highest levels of government. And here's the thing: you can't really trust mainstream media anymore to give you the full picture on stories like this. They're going to focus on the spectacle, the drama, the personalities, but they're not going to dig into what this actually means for the balance of power in Washington, for the Constitution, for the future of executive authority. That's why we built U.S. Power Alert, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. We break down the mechanisms, the precedents, the institutional dynamics that actually matter. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines and understand what's really happening in Washington before everyone else figures it out, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. We bring the news straight to you every single day, with analysis you won't find anywhere else. Just hit the subscribe button below to join us. And if you want to support this work and be part of a community that truly cares about the truth and about understanding how power actually works in this country, this is your moment. Subscribe and drop a comment below with your thoughts on what we're seeing unfold tonight, because this is history in the making, and we want to hear from you. All right. Let's get back to the video. Here's what happened. Over the past 72 hours, Senate leadership from both parties have been engaged in absolutely frantic behind-the-scenes negotiations, the kind of high-stakes maneuvering that rarely breaks into public view. According to multiple sources inside the Capitol, including senior staffers and at least 3 senators who spoke on condition of anonymity, the vote count has shifted dramatically since the trial began. What started as a seemingly partisan exercise, with Democrats holding all 50 of their votes, and Republicans standing firm at around 45 to 48 in opposition to conviction, has completely transformed into something nobody saw coming. The leaked reports indicate that as of tonight, at least 17 Republican senators have signaled privately that they are prepared to vote for conviction when the final vote is called. Combined with the 50 Democratic senators and the 3 independents who caucus with them, that brings the total to exactly 67 votes. The constitutionally required two-thirds supermajority needed to remove a president from office. The shift began over the weekend, when newly uncovered evidence presented by the House impeachment managers apparently crossed a red line for several Republican senators who had previously been considered solid votes against conviction. The details of that evidence remain partially under seal due to ongoing Justice Department investigations, but sources describe it as documentation related to the core charges in the articles of impeachment, materials that several senators have privately characterized as absolutely damning and impossible to ignore. One Republican senator, speaking off the record to reporters late last night, said that the evidence presented made it clear that remaining in office was no longer tenable, and that voting for conviction had become a constitutional obligation rather than a political choice. Another described the mood in private Republican caucus meetings as somber and deeply conflicted, with longtime allies of the administration expressing genuine shock at what they were seeing in the classified briefings. The White House, for its part, is in full crisis mode. Senior staffers have been working the phones non-stop since the reports started leaking this afternoon, reaching out to wavering senators, trying to shore up support, offering everything from policy concessions to political cover to future endorsements. But according to sources familiar with those conversations, the response has been cold. Several senators have simply stopped taking the calls. Others have been blunt in their assessments, telling White House officials that the evidence is too overwhelming, that the political cost of standing with the administration now exceeds the cost of breaking ranks, and that they have to think about their own legacies and their own political futures. One senior Republican senator reportedly told a White House liaison that history will not be kind to those who enable what's happening, and that he wasn't willing to be on the wrong side of that history. The breakdown of the 67 votes, according to the leaked Senate whip counts, is stunning when you look at who's actually flipping. This isn't just moderate Republicans in purple states who are worried about re-election. We're talking about senators from deep red states, senators who have been loyal to the administration for years, senators who have political bases that are overwhelmingly supportive of the president. The fact that they're breaking ranks now tells you just how serious the evidence must be, how untenable the situation has become. Among those reportedly in the conviction column are at least 3 senators who were considered core members of the president's inner circle in the Senate, people who have defended every controversy, every scandal, every norm-breaking move over the past several years. Their defection is being described by analysts as a complete political realignment, a recognition that the ground has fundamentally shifted. And this is where things start to unravel in ways that go far beyond just the immediate question of conviction. Because if the Senate actually votes to convict, if they cross that threshold of 67 votes, we're not just talking about the removal of one person from office. We're talking about a precedent that redefines what accountability looks like in the American system. We're talking about a message to future presidents that there are real consequences for abuses of power, that the Senate's constitutional role as a check on the executive branch is not just theoretical. We're talking about a moment that historians will point to for generations as a turning point in how the American Republic functions. And we're also talking about immediate, massive political and institutional chaos, because the mechanics of what happens next are complicated, fraught, and potentially destabilizing in their own right. Under the Constitution, if the Senate votes to convict, the president is immediately removed from office. There's no appeal process, no legal challenge that can reverse it. The vice president is immediately sworn in as president, assuming all the powers and responsibilities of the office. But here's the problem. The current vice president has been deeply involved in many of the same controversies that led to the impeachment in the first place. While the vice president is not being tried in this proceeding, the political legitimacy of the new administration would be immediately called into question by a significant portion of the country. You'd have roughly 40 to 45% of Americans who believe the impeachment was illegitimate from the start, who see this as a constitutional coup, who view the Senate's action as the establishment taking down a democratically elected leader. The potential for civil unrest, for political violence, for a complete breakdown in the peaceful transfer of power, is very real and very concerning to national security officials who have been quietly wargaming these scenarios. Beyond the immediate succession question, there's the matter of what the Senate does in the aftermath of conviction. The Constitution allows the Senate, after voting to convict, to hold a separate vote on whether to disqualify the removed official from ever holding federal office again. That vote only requires a simple majority, not a 2/3 supermajority. Given that 67 senators will have just voted for conviction, it's almost certain that a majority would vote for disqualification. That would permanently bar the individual from running for president again, from holding any federal office, effectively ending a political career that has dominated American politics for nearly a decade. The psychological and political impact of that kind of permanent disqualification cannot be overstated. It would represent a final, irrevocable judgment by the Senate that this individual is unfit to serve in any capacity in the federal government. Now, here's where this becomes a lot bigger than just one impeachment trial, bigger than one presidency. Let's talk about what this means for the institution of the presidency itself, for the balance of power in Washington, and for American democracy going forward. The impeachment power is one of the most significant checks that Congress has on the executive branch, but it's been used so rarely in American history, and successfully even less so, that it's often dismissed as a political tool rather than a real constitutional mechanism. We've had 3 presidential impeachments before this: Andrew Johnson in 1868, Bill Clinton in 1998, and the previous impeachment just a few years ago. And in every single case, the Senate failed to reach the 2/3 threshold for conviction. The closest we ever came was Johnson, where the vote was 35-19 for conviction, just one vote short of the required 2/3 at the time. Clinton wasn't even close, with the vote splitting almost entirely along party lines. The previous recent impeachment also fell well short, with only a handful of senators crossing party lines. So the fact that we're now looking at 67 votes for conviction represents a fundamental break from historical patterns. It suggests that whatever evidence has been presented, whatever abuses of power are at the center of these articles of impeachment, they have crossed a threshold that even deeply partisan senators cannot ignore. It suggests that the traditional party loyalty that has protected presidents in the past has finally reached its breaking point. And it suggests that the Senate, as an institution, is reasserting its constitutional role in a way that hasn't been seen in modern American politics. This is the separation of powers actually functioning the way the founders intended, with the legislative branch serving as a real check on executive overreach, rather than just rubber-stamping whatever the president does or reflexively opposing based on partisan calculations. But here's the thing, and this is what a lot of people are missing in the immediate reaction to the news. The decision by 17 Republican senators to vote for conviction is not happening in a vacuum. It's happening against the backdrop of the 2026 midterm elections, which are now less than 2 years away. Every single one of these senators knows that they will face political consequences for this vote. Some of them are up for re-election in 2026, and will have to answer to voters who may be furious about their decision. Others are thinking about their long-term political futures, about whether they want to be remembered as profiles in courage who stood up when it mattered, or as enablers who looked the other way. The calculation that each of these senators is making is deeply personal and deeply political, weighing their own conscience, their view of the Constitution, their assessment of the evidence, against the very real political risks of breaking with their party and their base. And let's be honest about what those risks are. In the current political environment, any Republican senator who votes for conviction is almost certain to face a primary challenge in their next election. They will be attacked as traitors, as part of the establishment swamp, as sellouts who betrayed the movement and the voters. They will lose financial support from major donors who remain loyal to the president. They will face pressure from party leadership, from conservative media, from grassroots organizations. Some of them may even face threats to their personal safety, given how inflamed the political climate has become. The fact that 17 of them are willing to take that risk, willing to accept those consequences, tells you something profound about the seriousness of this moment. Okay, let's break down what this actually means, because we need to look at this from multiple angles to really understand the scope of what's happening. First, understand that the immediate constitutional and legal implications are straightforward but profound. If the Senate votes to convict, the president is removed from office instantly. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who presides over presidential impeachment trials, will declare the verdict. And at that moment, the individual ceases to be president. The vice president takes the oath of office, probably within hours, and the federal government continues to function with new leadership. All executive orders remain in effect unless the new president chooses to rescind them. All appointed officials remain in their positions unless the new president chooses to replace them. The machinery of government keeps running, but the person at the top has changed, and that change carries enormous symbolic and practical weight. Second, think about the political ramifications inside the Republican Party. This is not just a defeat for one individual. This is a fracturing of the party itself, along lines that may never fully heal. You'll have one faction, probably the larger faction initially, that views the 17 Republican senators who voted for conviction as traitors who sold out the movement. They will demand that these senators be primaried, censured, stripped of committee assignments, excommunicated from the party. You'll have another faction, probably smaller but growing, that views those same 17 senators as heroes who saved the party from complete destruction, who prevented the Republican Party from being permanently associated with the abuses of power that led to the impeachment. The battle between these two factions will define Republican politics for the next decade. It will determine who runs for president in the next election, what the party platform looks like, which candidates get party support, and ultimately whether the Republican Party can rebuild itself into a governing coalition, or whether it splinters into warring camps that can't work together. Third, and this is huge, think about what this means for the 2026 midterm elections. Under normal circumstances, the party that controls the White House typically loses seats in the midterms. But these are not normal circumstances. If you have a conviction and removal happening in early 2025, more than a year before the midterms, the political landscape is completely scrambled. The new president, assuming it's the vice president, will be trying to establish legitimacy and separate themselves from the previous administration. Democrats will be trying to capitalize on the conviction, arguing that it proves their warnings about abuses of power were correct all along. Republicans will be split between those who want to move on and rebuild, and those who want to run on revenge and retribution against the senators who voted for conviction. The voter turnout models, the fundraising dynamics, the candidate recruitment, everything gets thrown into chaos. Political analysts are already saying that we could see the most volatile and unpredictable midterm election in modern history, with potential landslide victories for Democrats in some areas, and furious backlash victories for Trump-aligned Republicans in others. Fourth, let's talk about the international dimension, because this absolutely matters for America's standing in the world. Allies have been watching this impeachment trial very closely, trying to assess whether the United States is a stable, reliable partner, or whether American democracy is in genuine crisis. If the Senate votes to convict and remove a president, that sends a message to the world that American institutions still function, that there are real checks and balances, that the rule of law still means something. But it also sends a message of instability and unpredictability. Foreign governments that have spent years building relationships with the current administration suddenly have to recalibrate everything, build new relationships with a new administration, reassess their strategies for dealing with Washington. Adversaries like Russia and China will try to exploit the chaos, testing American resolve, pushing boundaries, seeing how much they can get away with while Washington is consumed with internal political battles. Allies in Europe and Asia will be reassessing their security commitments, their trade relationships, their intelligence sharing agreements, wondering whether they can count on American leadership in the long term, or whether they need to hedge their bets and develop more independent capabilities. Fifth, think about the economic and market implications. Financial markets hate uncertainty, and there is nothing more uncertain than the removal of a sitting president from office. We've already seen volatility in the markets over the past few days as rumors of the vote count started circulating. If conviction actually happens, you can expect immediate sell-offs, particularly in sectors that have been heavily dependent on policies from the current administration. You can expect currency fluctuations as international investors reassess the stability of the U.S. economy. You can expect credit rating agencies to start making noise about American political risk in ways they haven't in generations. The Federal Reserve will be watching all of this very carefully, trying to determine whether they need to intervene to stabilize markets, whether they need to adjust interest rates to manage the economic fallout. Business leaders who have been planning investments based on certain policy assumptions will have to completely rethink their strategies. The economic impact of this kind of political upheaval is hard to quantify, but it's real, and it will be felt by ordinary Americans in their retirement accounts, their job security, and their day-to-day economic prospects. Sixth, and this is something that doesn't get enough attention. Think about what this means for the precedent going forward. If the Senate successfully convicts and removes a president, that fundamentally changes the calculus for future presidents. It establishes that impeachment is not just a theoretical threat, not just a political talking point, but a real mechanism of accountability that can end a presidency. Future presidents will have to think much more carefully about the limits of their power, about which norms they can break and which ones they absolutely cannot. Future Congresses will have a proven template for how to check executive overreach, a successful case study they can point to when considering whether to pursue impeachment. The entire balance of power between the executive and legislative branches shifts in a way that hasn't happened since the Watergate era, and arguably even more dramatically than that because Nixon resigned before he could be convicted, whereas this would be the Senate actually following through with removal. Seventh, let's talk about the social and cultural implications. American society is already deeply polarized, with different communities living in completely different information ecosystems, consuming different news, believing fundamentally different narratives about reality. A Senate conviction is going to deepen those divides in ways that are genuinely scary. You will have roughly half the country celebrating this as a victory for justice and accountability, as proof that democracy still works, as a necessary correction to years of abuses of power. You will have the other half viewing this as an illegitimate coup, as the deep state and the establishment taking down a leader who threatened their power, as evidence that elections don't matter and that the elites will always find a way to overturn the will of the people. Those two groups are not going to suddenly come together and agree on a shared understanding of what happened. They're going to retreat further into their respective echo chambers, consume media that reinforces their existing beliefs, and view the other side not just as wrong but as fundamentally illegitimate. The long-term consequences for social cohesion, for trust in institutions, for the ability of Americans to live together in one country, despite deep disagreements, are incredibly concerning. And here's where it gets even more complicated. The Senate trial itself is scheduled to continue for at least another week of deliberations before the final vote. That means we're in this liminal space right now where everyone knows what's probably going to happen, the leaked vote counts are out there, the writing is on the wall, but nothing is final yet. Senators who are currently planning to vote for conviction could theoretically still change their minds if new evidence emerges or if political pressure becomes too intense. The White House still has time to try to change the outcome, to cut deals, to offer concessions, to find some way to peel off enough senators to get below the 67 threshold. Conversely, if more damaging information comes out in the next few days, you could see the vote count go even higher, with additional senators deciding that conviction is the only defensible choice. We're in a state of maximum uncertainty and maximum tension, with the entire country watching and waiting to see what happens next. People inside the Senate are saying that the mood is unlike anything they've experienced in decades of working in the Capitol. There's a sense of gravity, of history being made in real time, of decisions that will be studied and debated for generations. Senators are apparently writing their own statements explaining their votes, knowing that these will become part of the permanent record, part of how they are remembered. Senior staffers are comparing the atmosphere to the night before major military operations. That same combination of inevitability and anxiety, of knowing something massive is about to happen, but not being able to fully control or predict the outcome. Security around the Capitol has been dramatically increased, with concerns about potential violence or disruption when the final vote is announced. Law enforcement agencies across the country are on heightened alert, monitoring for any signs of organized efforts to disrupt government operations or intimidate officials. The procedural mechanics of the final vote are themselves worth understanding. When the Senate is ready to vote on conviction, each senator will be called by name and will have to publicly state their vote, yes or no, guilty or not guilty. There's no way to hide, no way to abstain, no way to vote present. Every senator has to go on the record, and that vote will follow them for the rest of their political careers and beyond. The Chief Justice will then tally the votes and announce the result. If 67 or more senators vote for conviction, the Chief Justice will declare the president convicted and removed from office. At that moment, constitutionally, the presidency transfers to the vice president. There will probably be some kind of brief ceremony, a swearing in, but the legal transfer of power is instantaneous. The individual who was president will no longer have access to the presidential powers, the nuclear codes, the ability to issue executive orders, any of it. It all transfers immediately to the successor. And then, almost certainly within the next day or two, the Senate will hold that second vote on disqualification from future office. That vote, as I mentioned, only requires a simple majority. Given that 67 senators will have just voted that the individual's conduct warranted removal from office, it's almost inconceivable that a majority wouldn't also vote that the individual should be disqualified from holding federal office again. That second vote, in many ways, is the final nail in the coffin of a political career. It's the Senate saying not just that you abused your power and need to be removed, but that you are fundamentally unfit to ever hold federal office again in any capacity. The historical weight of that judgment is hard to overstate. So here's the bottom line. We are potentially hours or days away from the most significant constitutional event in modern American history: the successful conviction and removal of a sitting president by the United States Senate. The leaked vote counts showing 67 senators prepared to vote for conviction suggest that this is not just a possibility, but a likelihood. Barring some dramatic last-minute shift, the implications stretch across every dimension of American political life, from the immediate question of succession and governance, to the long-term realignment of the Republican Party, to the precedent being set for future presidents and future Congresses, to America's standing in the world, to the economic stability of global markets, to the deepening social and cultural divides within American society. This is a moment that will define the next decade of American politics, and potentially much longer. It will determine whether the post-Watergate norm that presidents are effectively above the law except in the most extreme circumstances has been shattered, or whether this conviction proves to be an aberration that future presidents can work around. It will determine whether the Republican Party can rebuild itself as a governing party committed to constitutional principles, or whether it fractures into warring factions that spend years fighting each other instead of Democrats. It will determine whether American democracy emerges from this crisis stronger and more resilient, with its institutions proven capable of enforcing accountability, or whether it emerges weaker and more fragile, with millions of citizens convinced that the system is rigged and that political violence is justified. The stakes could not be higher. Keep your eyes on the Senate floor over the next several days. Watch which senators make statements before the vote, what they say, how they justify their positions. Watch how the White House responds as it becomes clear that they can't stop what's coming. Watch how party leaders on both sides try to manage their caucuses and prepare for the aftermath. Watch the international reaction, particularly from key allies and adversaries who are trying to figure out what this means for their relationships with Washington. Watch the markets, which will give you a real-time read on how investors and business leaders are processing this information. Watch your own communities, your own social media feeds, your own conversations, because the way Americans process and understand this moment will shape our politics for years to come. This story is far from over. Even if the Senate votes to convict and remove the president, that's just the beginning of a whole new chapter in American political history. The battles over legitimacy, over party identity, over the direction of the country, over the lessons we draw from this moment, those battles will continue for years. We'll be covering every development, every angle, every implication, because understanding what's happening right now is absolutely critical to understanding where American democracy is headed. This is the kind of moment that historians write books about, that future generations study in school, that fundamentally reshapes the political landscape. And we're living through it in real time. Stay informed, stay engaged, and make sure you're getting the full context and analysis, not just the surface-level headlines. This is U.S. Power Alert, bringing you the real story behind the biggest political crisis of our generation.